Well, hello, Madcappers. Today, I'm going to show you the Rosie Cap's big sister, the Rosie Hat. And here I am modeling the cap version of this pattern that we made in our last video. And we decorated our hat with a flower pin. But I showed you that you could also use buttons to decorate your finished cap, and that you can mix and match different fabrics as long as they are stretchy. And I will always recommend that you use mostly Polar Fleece for our winter line, but if you have fabric like this that stretches on the bias, and here I am pulling it on the grain, there's no stretch, but when you pull it on the bias, you end up with a nice stretchy piece of fabric. So we need to use our fabric that we blend with our caps and hats on the bias. And here is Rosie's big sister, the full brimmed hat. Now, both of these styles of the Rosie are designed so that they are flat on the back. They're great for commuting. And you'll see the pattern piece will include both the visor and the full cap brim. And I'm going to show you how to make those three hats today in this video. So the first step is to cut the brim for the Rosie hat. The cap has a visor, the hat has a brim, and our black outline of the pattern piece includes a seam width of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. But if you need a bigger seam width, cut to the edge of that outside blue shadow. And blue is the size medium, which is the average lady's size. And I am gluing my pattern pieces onto nice heavy poster board so that I can use them over and over again. And if you make hats, if you're using this for a small business, I recommend you do the same. And I've done it for all the pattern pieces. I'm using extra firm sew-in stabilizer for my brim, and I used the same stabilizer for my cap visor in the last video. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut a piece off of my roll, and I will trace the outline of my brim right onto the stabilizer before I cut out the fleece for the rest of my brim pattern pieces. And I've got the right sides together, and I'm using a black, good quality Polar Fleece that's pill resistant on one side for my Rosie brim. And I just want to make a note here to tell you that this is my process. This doesn't have to be the way that you cut out your brim. You just do whatever you feel is comfortable for you to have the same result as I have there. 3 pieces that are all the same size. And I'm just going to sew the stabilizer onto the wrong side of one of those fleece brim pieces. And I will use an edge stitch to do that, going around the whole piece of the brim and joining those 2 pieces together. So the brim is made of 3 pieces, 2 pieces of fleece and 1 piece of stabilizer, and I've sewn the stabilizer onto the back of one of the fleece brim pieces, and now I'm going to reunite them together, right sides together, and I'll just pin in place before I go back over to the sewing machine and to continue the process of making my brim. Again, this is my process. It doesn't have to be yours. You can do however you'd like to sew those pieces together and finish off that brim to have the same result that I do when I'm finished showing you these next steps. But I've measured 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters down from each end of my brim assembly. I'm going to sew those pieces together along that outside edge with my regular seam width, which is 3/8 of an inch, starting at that point that's 3 inches from the end of one side and sewing all the way around to that other point, that other mark I made with a pencil, 3 inches in from the end of the other side. And once I've done that, I'm going to do the back seam of the brim. So I'll put the right sides together of the 2 pieces that have the sew-in stabilizer attached. And I'll put the right sides together of the piece of fleece that will be the underside of my brim that doesn't have the stabilizer attached. And I'm just going to use my regular seam width to join those 2 ends together. One will be the top of the brim and one will be the underside. And once I've done that, I'm going to open up those 2 back seams flatten them out with my fingers, just sort of finger pressing, and I'll finish closing that outside edge of the brim. Just matching up the back seams. And I really like the way that the brim turns out this way. I find that it makes a really nice flat brim, a nice flat outside edge that's continuous all the way around the hat. No bulky seams for this girl, folks. Now you can go around the brim and make small clips on that outside section of your seam, on that raw edge, or you can do what I do and I just finish that edge with a serge. And it just cleans up all the little raw cuts and nicks and makes a nice firm edge inside the brim that I can do this next step, which just turn the pieces right side out and roll out that edge. So the pieces are the same on each side of that outside edge seam. And as I roll, I will clip and hold them in place, and I'm going to add some clips onto that inside edge of the brim as well, just matching up those raw edges that are still on the inside curve of my brim. And then I'm going to finish off that edge, that outer edge, with a top stitch. And my trusty magnetic seam guide is still at about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter in depth. And I'll add a top stitch just to finish off that edge nice and neatly. Making sure that those back seams are open as I sew over top of them underneath. And now I'm going to just do an edge stitch on that inside brim. Again, my seams are open underneath, and I'm going to close it up with an edge stitch all the way around. And when I get back to the point of the back seam where I started, I will just finish off with my Madcap Hats label. And there you have it, a finished brim. The full version of this pattern comes with both the pieces for the visor and the brim, and the visor is unique in that it almost goes around the hat, so it's a really wide, broad visor that gives you lots of protection, more so than a regular baseball cap. And you see I've put the pieces for the rest of the hat on poster board as well, because I'm going to be using this pattern over and over and over again. There is a free copy of the brim in our regular or our average adult head size, which is medium, and the paid version for a nominal fee, just to cover the cost of digitizing. It comes in 6 head sizes in 1/2-inch increments, and the links for both will be in the description below. And I'm going to just do all the rough sewing, or I call it the rough sewing now, just sewing up back seams and that dart that goes down the center of the back of the top, and that dart is there to give the top a slightly rounded shape, just like the top of our heads, which means there's no pulling on the band seam when I get to the stage and I show you how to sew the top onto the rest of the hat, and you'll see what I mean. So I'm just going to cut my center notches as well, and I'm going to sew up all those back seams now, including that dart down the center of the top. And I'm using my regular seam widths of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. And now, once I finish those seams, I'm going to open them up and I'm going to sew them down flat, because there's nothing worse than a bulky hat seam in a hat. Nobody likes an uncomfortable hat, so I always like to sew my seams flat, and I do that by opening up the seam and sewing from the right side, up one side of the seam, down the other, and making a flat top stitch seam. And I do it for the top as well. Sew into the center of the top with that seam open underneath, pivot, come back down the other side of your seam. And hopefully the picture is worth 1,000 words and you are following what I'm doing. And there's my pieces now, and we're ready to put the Rosie hat together. So I'll start by sewing the 2 pieces of the outside band together. And I've got the right sides together of my woolen piece and my fleece. And this is that seam that would be in the center of the band, and I'm just joining the notches together, and I'll ease in the pieces as I go. I'm being careful not to stretch that piece I cut out on the bias, that plaid piece, as I sew the 2 together. And there we go. And now I'll cut a center notch in my brim. And now I'm ready to sew the band onto the brim. And again, right sides together. I've picked a side of the brim that's going to be my outside or my top brim. And I'm matching the right sides of my band along the lower part of the band or the bottom of the band where the woolen fabric is. And I'm just going to slowly go around with my normal seam width and ease in that piece, being careful not to stretch that bias cut fabric as I go. So just take your time, folks. That's my advice in all of my videos. Just take your time, especially the first one where we're learning together how to do this. And then once you've done one, you can just change the steps to make it work for you. What I'm showing you works for me and the way that I designed these hats. And now I'm going to attach the piece of my fleece that is my lining, and the lining is cut in one piece. And I'll show you later on in the video how you can use the lining piece as your outside band as well. And I'm just going to follow along that seam that I made when I attached the outside band or the two-part band to the brim, and the lining is underneath. And I'm just easing it in as I go, matching notches and back seams. And now I'm going to take my brim and I'm going to pull it on the left side and grab the two pieces of my band and pull it on the right side and pull them all out. And you'll notice that the piece for the outside of your band is just a little bit deeper than the lining piece. And if you don't like that, you can trim that outside band piece at the top, but I like it a little puffy so that I can have the seam in the center of that outside band facing upwards towards the top of the hat, where it will lie comfortably and give me a little bit of a puffy look, a little bit of an interest to the hat. Some texture, so to speak. And as I match up that raw edge at the top of both pieces of the band, I'm just pinning in place and pulling the bottom part of the band and the bottom part of the lining out so that they're the same on the inside as well. And just adjusting that seam along the center so that it's facing upwards towards the top of the hat. Now we will sew those two band pieces together along that top raw edge using an edge stitch. Now you can try on the hat right now and see how it fits. If you find that it's a little loose, I would do this next step, which is optional, but I'm just adding a line of top stitching in the center of the hat. I'm working on the lower band section, and I've just got my left side of the presser foot rested up against the seam or the bulk of the fleece that's on the upper band section. And I've done a nice line of top stitching, which just gives the hat a little bit of a tighter fit, which I find I need. And now I'm going to clip the back seam to the center front notch at the top of the band. And I'm going to cut a couple of notches one on each side so that when I get to this stage, I can ease in my top and match all those notches together. So matching up the back seam, right sides together, I'm just going to put my top in place, and I'll match up those new side notches as well. And then I'm going to be using my regular seam width to sew the top onto the rest of the hat, and the right sides are together, and my magnetic seam guide is doing all the heavy lifting as I rest the raw edges on the right side up against the magnet, and it gives me a good even stitch all the way around. And once you get back to your starting point, and again folks, just take your time, but I just over sew at the end. And I'm just checking my work to make sure it's even and it looks great on the outside and on the wrong side. And now I'm just going to add another layer of top stitching at the very top, pushing that seam towards the top of the hat, the middle of the top of the hat, off to the left as you can see, and just using the edge of my presser foot as my guide. Okay, so far so good. I'm just going to finish off that seam inside, and I'm going to give it a tight serge with my differential feed, just pulling that seam inwards towards the center of the top, and ta-da! We're going to use the Cricut Hat pressing form, and we have a contest, so we have an extra one to give away that we bought. We are not being sponsored by Cricut, so just make a comment below to be entered, and we will be drawing on New Year's Eve, and someone will get a Cricut Hat Press and Cricut Hat Press pressing form of their own. Thank you so much for watching our videos and supporting this first year of our channel. So I'm using the pressing form just to finish off that top of my hat. And it does a lovely job, and this form can be shaped into all sorts of different configurations. I really love it. It's full of walnut shells, however, so if you have a nut allergy, it won't be for you. And I would suggest maybe if you're serious about hat making, getting a hat block. And I get mine from Judith M. in the Chicago area of the United States. And I would suggest getting one in the regular size, 22.5 inches or 57.5 centimeters. And it does a nice job. There's one of the hats that I made, and I didn't do those top stitches, so you can choose either way. And I'm just going to show you quickly how I made that flower. I'm using my Big Shot by Sizzix and my dies to cut out pieces from the leftovers of my fleece scraps, and you can use different buttons. I made one. I have a fabric covered button kit, but you could just use a commercial button. And then I'm using craft felt to make a pin back and hot glue. And it's a pretty fast and easy way to make a special trim for your hat, a custom trim. You're combining all the fabrics that you use for your hat. And I've just got a circle of the craft felt. It's the stiffened craft felt and a regular stainless steel safety pin. The Rosie Cap video goes into this in more detail, but the links will be in the description below, and there's another one that I made. And you can trim in all sorts of different ways these hats, so you can add more buttons and not do a flower, or you could do an applique that you make yourself. Now you could just buy buttons, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this fabric that I used for that hat. It was see-through, so I put it on a piece of fleece just to make it have some body. So if you're going to use something like a fancy boucle, like I used here, just line it at the back with a piece of your fleece. And then you'll have a nice hat like this one. And then I put my buttons on after I sewed the band onto the brim. You can see there's little tacks at the back of my buttons, but you can hand sew buttons on that you buy in a store. And now I'm going to show you how to make an applique, and I'm using the double-sided adhesive fuse called Heat and Bond, which I use in my summer hat brims. And I'm just going to use some Heat and Bond on the wrong side of my fleece. Just iron it on, following the instructions. I'm using the wool setting of my iron. And then I'm going to use my Sizzix again and cut a nice little applique with my die. You could definitely just hand cut something. You can get all sorts of free graphics on the internet, but I'm using my Sizzix and my die, and I made this little leaf pattern, and I will remove it. And I cut that gray hat out using 2 pieces of the lining for the hat. So I'm using the same piece as the lining as I'm using on the outside band. And I'll just cut my center notches for my center front seam and my center top seam. And that helps me place this applique as well. I guess it's not really a traditional applique because I'm not sewing on it. I'm using this fuse to attach it. And it's really magical, folks. You'll see that it sort of becomes one with the piece that it's being fused to. It's really great. I love doing this. So once I set it in place, I've taken off the paper on the back and I'm just positioning it. And then I will cover it with a piece of quilting cotton just to protect the fleece fibers. and then I'll fluff it up a little bit while it's still warm. And I have a custom-made band for my hat. And this is how you can line your top. Some people have asked about that, so I've just cut an extra piece of top fabric out of my Cassia coat lining, but you could use broadcloth if you like. And you're just going to put the wrong sides together, and you'll sew the lining to the back of your top. So you have a 2-layer top, and just use an edge stitch going all the way around, and then attach it to your hat. And following those same steps, you're just going to work the right sides together, matching up all those notches and easing in the top as you work your way around. Check your work. Close up all those raw edges with a tight serge, and then of course use your Cricut Hat pressing form to finish the job and give your top a nice rounded shape with nice flat seams that your customers are going to love. And I always use a piece of the light quilting cotton in between my iron and my winter hat fabrics. And again, the hat iron, or the iron is set at the wool setting, and I'm going to do both sides of the hat. And I press both sides of the hat, and now I'm just going to finish off with an optional row of top stitching just at the very top, at the top of the band, using that seam between the top and the top of the band as my guide. And there you have it. It looks nice too. I hope I've given you lots of ideas about how to make a Rosie cap and a Rosie hat and how to trim them, because trimming is half of the battle, folks. I mean, you make a nice hat and you want it just to be extra special. I really like making the flower pins, but I have grown fond of buttons and bows as well. So what do you think? Do you like the cap or the hat? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, then you'll be entered into that Cricut Hat Press Kit contest. And this is the Niagara brim using the Rosie band and the Rosie top, so you can mix and match our pattern pieces, especially in the winter line. And here I am modeling my new hat, as well as my fingerless gloves, and make sure you pick up a copy of that pattern. The video for that is on our channel as well. Thank you so much to our video producers, our patrons, and our channel members for supporting the channel. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Tori Cape, Certified Milliner. Madcap hats are my original designs. I look forward to teaching you how to make just about all of them. So we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.